What's up, gang? Welcome to the latest and last edition of Society by Brad. Today we're going to be looking at Better Call Saul overall and the sociological concepts that we found throughout watching the show together. So to start off, this show really challenges you to look at it and then look at yourself after you watch the show and even during when you're watching the show. So when you're watching Jimmy, the main character of course, run his scams and harebrained schemes and all his things, they're not always quite moral. They're not always on the right side of your conscience. But yet, you still kind of find yourself wondering, well, I mean, if I was in that position, I wouldn't see anything else to do. If I was in his spot, I think I might do the same thing. And so in that, it kind of makes you question your own perception of yourself, your own sociological imagination. You think, if I was in his shoes, would I do that? Is it moral? Do I have better morals than him? And so it kind of makes you wonder and it kind of makes you think. So in that way, it's a really good show for making you explore your own sociological self. Some of the biggest themes over the course of the show in general, definitely, as we mentioned, the morality for sure. He violates norms, folkways, mores, all these things. He kind of walks right up to the line and then even sometimes steps over it at times. So he does break the law, and you do have to kind of reconcile that. So there's crime and deviance within the show. That's a big theme. What's legal? What's illegal? What's right? What's wrong? And then what would you do if you were in the situations? And do you agree with what Jimmy does in those situations? There's definitely role strain again in this show too. That's definitely a big part of it. Jimmy has to, he's like an octopus. He's got 8 arms, and he's got everyone tugging at him, and from every different direction. He's got this client. He's got that client. He's got Kim. He's got all the people at Hamlin McGill. He has his brother Chuck. He has all these different people that he has to have different roles for. So he definitely, he acts differently when he's with Kim versus when he's with Chuck, versus when he's with Howard. He acts differently in all these different situations. And so there's also the concept of peer groups. So Jimmy obviously is a lawyer, and so he also deals with other lawyers. But he's not quite in their peer group because they see themselves at this level. They're in the peer group up here, and then they kind of look down on Jimmy down here. He has a lower status as compared to them in their peer group, and he's not really accepted into their peer group of the legitimate lawyers because he does some illegal stuff sometimes. So they kind of look down on him for that. And definitely the dramaturgical theory is absolutely played out in this as well, because when Jimmy is trying to convince someone of something or sell his services as a lawyer, he definitely puts on a show. He's definitely acting like he's on stage. He's definitely, playing the role that needs to be played in order to accomplish the conclusion of the dramaturgical theory. So that definitely plays out. Normative practices, things you have to know about like life and sociology in general before you watch the show. Obviously, it's a spin-off of Breaking Bad, so watching Breaking Bad would definitely help you in that context. It kind of familiarizes you with the culture of Albuquerque, the culture of lawyers, the culture of the New Mexico Public Defender's Office, all those types of things. But generally, outside of the Breaking Bad stuff, you should probably have a basic foundation of like, okay, lawyers. I perceive lawyers as rich people who wear suits and drive fancy cars. That way, when you see what Jimmy does, it kind of, oh, okay, he's also a lawyer. That's funny. And then you would get the joke. You would get, the concept of the show is that, yes, he's a lawyer, but he's really kind of a criminal. He's a smooth-talking, fast-acting criminal that does what he needs to do in order to get by. You definitely also should know a little bit about, the concept of crime and deviance, what laws typically look like and what the punishments are for violating those laws within society. If you don't really have an understanding of crime or deviance, then watching the show is probably going to be a little bit of a struggle. And then also knowing within crime and deviance that typically, because there's the whole story arc of the Kettlemans, Craig and Betsy Kettleman. They're rich, suburban, white-collar people, and yet they still engage in crime. And so when they're caught up in the crime world, they act completely different versus someone who would be, typically expected to be in the crime world because they're rich. You wouldn't think of them as being criminals, but they are. And so there's a little bit of some comedy there. It was like, oh, yeah, they're criminals, but they don't know how to act like it. So that's kind of a joke that runs throughout the episodes that they're involved in. Sociological intent, again, we kind of mentioned it really does make you question your own morality, question, where do you stand on these issues, and you really have to like reconcile that within yourself with morals and, everything we talked about earlier. And then as far as watching the show, it really does make you think like, why am I rooting for Jimmy? Why am I wanting him to succeed? He's breaking the law. I live in a society in which these same laws exist, and I abide by them. I mean, I don't know, but theoretically, I'm a person who abides by these laws. I see Jimmy breaking these laws, yet I'm still rooting for him. So you kind of have to think about that after you watch the show and say, why did I root for him? Oh, it's because he's, at his heart, an honest person. At his heart, he's a hard worker. At his heart, he's a good, moral person. Then as far as changing whether or not you're a Christian, I mean, that's really up to you. It's up to your feeling of like what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a moral person. And so, being a Christian in society, you would maybe have a different perception of what Jimmy does versus a non-Christian. And it's really up to a personal decision as the viewer, whether or not being a Christian affects whether you enjoy the show or not enjoy the show, or think it's funny or think it's too crude or whatever. But yeah, it's really up to a personal thing. So that's what we've got for Better Call Saul. Great show. I loved it. Very funny, very, tear-jerking at times. But it's a really great show, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone who's looking for something new to watch on Netflix. So thank you guys for coming along on this ride. This has been Society by Brad, logging off.